The first question we have here is a couple people have asked some questions regarding enforcement and non-compliance. So the question would be, what are the consequences to non-compliance with the Watercourses Convention? Can you please discuss the enforcement mechanisms? And then how can we apply the lessons learned from the UNWC to other, future practices in the state and international level regarding enforcement? Anyone can respond to that.
Well, shall I have a go, and then feel free to others to chip in. My point would be that if you start thinking about enforcement and a very centralized top-down enforcement mechanism to ensure that the convention is implemented, then you'll fail. It's not how the experience, particularly from multilateral environmental agreements, it's shown very well in the UNECE Water Convention, is that what is required are mechanisms to promote compliance, to ensure that there are the technical, financial measures underneath a treaty regime that can support areas capacity building to strengthen implementation of a convention, or it could be more general mechanisms at a cross-cutting mechanisms within a treaty regime, such as an implementation committee. Compliance committee is one just established under the UNECE Water Convention to identify, have a reporting mechanism to identify what's happening in terms of implementing the convention, maybe some difficulties and bottlenecks, and then think about some strategies and solutions to support that compliance, to the implementation. And I think that the track record now we have quite a lot of experience actually of implementing MEAs. We can say that's a much better strategy, and I think if we talk about enforcement, then we're really missing that important picture.
Okay, thank you very much, panelists. I've muted your microphones. We're having a lot of background noise. So if you would like to respond, please just raise your hand real quick, and I will unmute you, and that'll keep our background noise down to a minimum. Okay, I'll go ahead and Dr. Salman, did you have thoughts?
Yes, I just want to briefly add, to agree with and endorse what Ali said, but I want to add one quick statement. That this is the UN Watercourses Convention is really a framework convention, which is to be complemented by watercourse specific agreements that would take into account and into consideration the specific circumstances surrounding that watercourse. So I think we have to keep that in mind also when we talk about compliance. This is really a framework convention. Thank you.
1 second, Professor McIntyre. All right, Professor McIntyre.
I would just say very briefly, agreeing both with Ali and Salman, that in many ways to focus on compliance or to focus on a compliance mechanism is to misunderstand the function of an instrument of this sort. That this instrument is really about assisting states in developing further arrangements, if you like, as between them, where states are interdependent because they share, critical water resources. This provides a starting point for negotiation for the onward development and elaboration of rules that are appropriate as between those states, which might, in fact, if those states trust each other enough, or don't trust each other enough, might result in certain types of compliance mechanisms. But it's to misunderstand a global instrument of this sort, and indeed many of the key instruments in international law are much more around facilitating effective communication between states than having a hard and fast and binding set of rules which can be enforced as such in the way that domestic laws are.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a good summary of the answers. And we go on to that was a question from Flavia had sent that in before the presentation began, so I'm not sure who that originated, but you're passing it along, and thank you very much for that. The next question comes from Benjamin Nori, and I'm going to combine that with a question from Kui Kui, who basically are looking a little bit more specific answers. How will the entry into force for the UNWC, how will that affect some specific basins and areas of the world? We're talking about the Mekong or the Nile, or how could this perhaps be more broadly applied to the entire Asian region? Who would like to start us off? Any takers? Oh, Professor McIntyre. All right, thank you. There you go.
I think the reason you have hesitation on the part of the speakers is there are maybe 30 answers to that. We can answer that in any number of ways. One way that I think occurs to me, and that maybe I meant to mention in my presentation systems, was that the UN Convention is largely a codification of customary rules. But the fact that these rules are included in the Convention, and the fact that the Convention then enters into force, greatly enhances their status as custom. And so these rules really are, whether states become party to the UN Convention or not, or Watercourses Convention or not, are greatly enhanced in terms of their generally applicable customary status. So in terms of all of the various provisions that are in the Convention, I think they are greatly enhanced by its entry into force. I think we have to be quite clear about that. It's very, very important that it enters into force, and its entry into force will probably give rise to ratification by more states, which will again further enhance the customary value of the key provisions, and we have a virtuous circle in terms of a clarifying of any of the grey areas that are left in international water law. Specifically, thinking about, say, the Asia region, I would say that dispute settlement might be a very interesting development in that particular region, where states are very, very, very slow to go to dispute settlement, or to even recognise that there is a dispute, an interstate dispute. And the fact that you have quite an innovative, quite non-threatening in many ways mechanism within the Convention. The only compulsory element of dispute settling is non-judgmental fact-finding, just basically to try and establish the facts with an independent commission. That perhaps that might encourage states in the Asia region, the broader Asia region, to engage more in formal dispute settlement along a fact-finding route. I would hypothesize, or I would anticipate, that might be one particular benefit that would have for that region. I'm sure my colleagues can think of many more.
Yeah. Who else would like a crack at that? All right, Remy, I'll unmute you here. All right, Remy.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I just support what Owen said in terms of the looking at these as framework. The Watercourses Convention as a framework convention. If you look at the two essentially regional transboundary water sharing agreements, both in the UNECE, which is obviously now becoming a global agreement, essentially, effectively, in terms of it's open to ratification by states outside the UNECE, but also the SA, the Southern African Development Community shared revised protocol on shared watercourses. I think Salman wrote a very good article back in the day around the looking at the complementarity or the key similarities and differences between the UN Watercourses Convention and the SADC revised protocol. And looking at those two instruments, there are differences between the two, but it's kind of a similar situation to the UNECE Water Convention, where the basic provisions are there to support the complementarity, and the regional and even all the way down to basin level agreements essentially provide the context for those basins and those regions. And the UN Watercourses Convention provides that global baseline upon which to elaborate for those contexts. And the focus of the Southern African Development Community on regional development and economic integration, and the UNECE Water Convention's focus on transboundary harm and pollution prevention. I mean, those are the kind of functions of those, or the contextual niches of those specific regional agreements, and that builds on the kind of global baseline of the Watercourses Convention.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Salman, the floor is yours.
Okay, I would like to address the issue with regards to the Nile countries and their response to the UN Watercourses Convention. And I just would like to bring that to the attention of the panelists as well as the audience, that I wrote a blog on, which was published in Gabriel Eckstein's website, International Water Law Project, as well as in my website. And the title of the blog was Entry into Force of the UN Watercourses Convention. Where are the Nile Basin countries? With a question mark at the end. And I thought the question was important because going back to the 1997, when the convention was adopted by the General Assembly, there were really 4 very divergent positions of the Nile countries. Sudan and Kenya voted for the convention. Burundi voted against the convention. Egypt, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Rwanda abstained, but abstained for different reasons. And then Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Eritrea did not attend the session. So you have the 10 countries, each, there are 4 groups of where those 4 countries stood. And I'd like to spend a minute why Egypt, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Rwanda abstained, and the different reasons. Egypt abstained because, and they recorded saying that they felt the convention is much more on the side of the equitable and reasonable utilization. It has not given enough attention and enough weight to the question of no harm and the existing uses, which is a basic principle that Egypt relies on. On the other hand, Ethiopia, Tanzania recorded their one concern with the objection is that the notification, which came out later on. They felt that the notification procedures they were concerned that it could be construed as giving recognition to the 2 colonial treaties, the 1902 and the 1929 treaties, which give Egypt a veto power over their projects and programs. Rwanda felt the same way, although they did not record this. So we have different reasons for abstention. And this same problem, the same positions, voting against the convention, and abstaining were later taken on when the Nile countries started negotiating the cooperative framework agreement. The same problems that were surfaced and prevented those countries from joining the convention came on the CFA. But they took different positions. They took different positions in CFA. Egypt and Sudan opposed the CFA. The Upper Riparians adopted the CFA and signed it. Ethiopia now has ratified it, but without the notification arrangements of the convention. The notification procedures that were laid down in details in the convention are not there in the CFA. There is just an issue of exchange of data and information through the commission that would be established. So the main problems that surfaced in 1997 and late 1998 about the convention really surfaced later on the CFA. They were not resolved fully, and the same problems are still prevalent. So the issue for the Nile Basin countries is really to resolve the issue, or to resolve their differences over the colonial treaties. Without resolution of their positions on the colonial treaties, there will be problems with the convention, there will be problems with CFA, and there will be problems with the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and the other projects that are to be built in the Upper Riparian countries. So it's mainly the dispute on the colonial treaties is still prevalent, and it will continue and will stand on the way not only on those treaties but also on future cooperation between the countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salman. It was a good technical discussion, I know, of an area that a lot of people are very interested in hearing about. I think I'm going to go on to the next question here, and this will kind of serve to orientate us moving forward a little bit. Coming from Heidi Jinkel at the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature and Conservation, asks, how do stakeholders and leaders think we can promote things going forward? How can we promote the convention? How can individual states be active in addition to obviously ratifying, but what else can be done to promote the convention and I guess both the customary international law and the goals that it enshrines? Anyone want to? Flavia? There you go. Thank you. You have the floor.
Yeah, and thank you, Scott, and thanks, Heidi, for the question. She's someone that we've been working with also over the years, so I'm glad to hear that she's joined. In the report that Ali and Remy, to which they referred before, that was one of the issues that we looked at. What is the architecture, and who's out there basically working on transboundary water issues, and what role they could eventually play. And it's easier to look at specific actors because they would each have different roles to play. And just for some examples, I mentioned briefly the Global Environment Facility. The same way that the Watercourses Convention doesn't have governance mechanisms, it doesn't have a funding mechanism explicitly included. And funding, it's what it all boils down to, right? If you don't have funds to do things, then things really can't move forward. So going back to the recent example of the Mercury Convention, that it was included in the text, but immediately upon, as ratification started happening, the parties went back to the JEF and confirmed that we want the Global Environment Facility to become our funding mechanism. So, and that's what the JEF has been doing, funding all these different MEAs. So the first thing was for the JEF to include in their new strategy for this new cycle explicit references to these two conventions so that they acknowledge that this is coming up. But now what needs to happen is for the parties to come together and request JEF to become this this funding mechanism, since that's not there included in the convention. Another set of actors that I would refer to is, again, river basin organizations. During the ratification process, we worked very closely with many of them, and they really have this convening power, facilitating power to bring their member states together and create a forum in which they can discuss pros and cons, any fears, any concerns that they may have. So river basin organizations should step up and embrace this role. And I'm hoping that this forum that UNEP will organize in November will, as an outcome, will have very concrete proposals of how RBOs can do that. Again, funding would be needed for this, so it goes back to the GF issue. And again, in terms of starting from now, none of these actors would have to start from scratch. The UN Watercourses Convention Global Initiative leaves an incredible legacy behind, and again, I have to thank all the other speakers here because they've all contributed to this legacy, and that our online users guide is all there, so they can look at specific basins and think about the research that we've covered on specific role that the convention could play, so they don't have to start from zero, like we did when we were starting the global initiative years ago. So, and I think the message is different actors will have a different role to play, but they all have a very good, very strong baseline from which to start, and that's on the online users guide. So hopefully that will support anything that they decide to do on this. Thanks.
Dr. McIntyre, did I see your hand there, or did you have a point to make?
No, my screen went blank. I was just trying to bring back my screen.
Oh, sorry. Okay, then Dr. Salman, did you have a point?
No, Ali is raising his hand.
Ali, okay. Ali, I'm on both sides of you here. There we go. Gotcha. Professor Rieu-Clarke?
Okay, I think that's working now.
Yeah, there we go.
Great. I just wanted to add to what Flavia has already said, and good to hear. It's a nice question from Heidi. We have a lot of experience in workshops, running workshops, training and awareness raising workshops around the international water law generally and Watercourses Convention, West Africa, East Africa, Southeast Asia, nationally in Vietnam, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and more recently in Palestine, and there's such a tremendous value in just sort of raising awareness. I mean, essentially, the Watercourses Convention, the UNECE Water Convention, at their core is a simple message, and it's about cooperation. States must cooperate over these resources. The international watercourses they're indivisible. They require cooperation. So where some states may try to refrain from such cooperation, ultimately to ensure their fair and sustainable use, there must be cooperative arrangements in place, and that's the essence of both these framework conventions, at least at a global level, trying to push for that, and so trying to get to the heart of what that means within the conventions and address some of the misunderstandings and misperceptions. Salman has mentioned about this, whether notification really provides a right to veto, and I say it certainly doesn't. He produced a fantastic piece in Water International addressing these misperceptions, misrepresentations, and I think a lot of work can be done within workshops, within the materials. Flavia mentioned the user's guide to just simply get that message out there, that there's at the core of these instruments is this duty to cooperate, and we must do our best to promote it. And certainly entry into force of a Watercourses Convention provides a nice milestone. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, but a nice milestone, and perhaps as we mentioned before, a snowball effect to promote this message.
Can I make one very brief point? Heidi's question, I think, related to what can individual states do, and I would suggest that one thing that they can actually do is where they do provide overseas development assistance, to actually look at where states have a problem with water, where there is a problem in terms of cooperating with water, and to try and promote the convention among states that that donor states deal with their partners in developing states, and seek to promote the convention in that way. I mean, one of the drivers for a number of states to ratify the convention was basically so that they could be in a position to promote the convention in their overseas development assistance. So that's perhaps just one, as a very brief input, one way that individual states perhaps can bring some influence to bear, be persuasive. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Does anyone else have a point on that? No? Okay. Well, I see that we're about 20 minutes over our allotted time, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up. We have a few more questions remaining, and I'm going to forward your questions to our panelists and ask them to respond to you all offline. But I think we were able to get to answering, if not your specific question, then at least the thoughts behind your question for many people who had asked and written to us. I'd like to thank again our panel for your participation today. Thank you for giving us your time, giving us 20 extra minutes of your time. So thank you to Dr. Alistair Rieu-Clarke, Dr. Salman, Dr. Owen McIntyre, Ms. Flavia Loures, and Mr. Remy Kinna. Thank you very much for your time. And I think today we did really discuss a lot of great points about the UN Watercourses Convention. The instrument has been under development for such a long period of time. With Vietnam signing, it raised a lot of excitement. I saw a tremendous outburst of energy, but I think it also raised a lot of questions about where was the instrument going, where is international water law going in the future. And I think that this webinar answered a lot of those questions. I think it raised a lot of other interesting questions to talk about in the future. I'd like to remind all of our listeners that this webinar is based on the special issue that was edited by Professor Alistair Rieu-Clarke, Mrs. Flavia Loures, and Mr. Remy Kinna from Water International, the IWRA's flagship journal. And it is also the subject of our forthcoming policy briefing, which will be available on our website, www.iwra.org, very soon. So you can go to our website and you can enjoy the policy briefing. It's a short explanation and summary of the topics covered here in the webinar. So I would like to thank everyone for tuning in today on behalf of the whole IWRA staff. I'd like to remind everyone that we are a nonprofit. We are a non-governmental educational organization. We work on bridging disciplines and geographies, connecting professionals, connecting students, individuals and corporations and institutions, everyone who's concerned with our sustainable water future. We are hosting a World Water Congress next May in Scotland, in Dundee. We'll be having University of Dundee will have a strong water law track there. Will be helping us. So if you are interested in these topics and these issues, please consider coming to Scotland with us. And if you're interested in learning more about our organization, more about the work we do, please go to our website, www.iwra.org, and you'll learn more and you could potentially become a member. So please consider going to our website and learning more. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for your time. Have a good day or night as it is wherever you are. Thank you for your time. Just we can all log off.